Fire Emblem 6 is a game with a pretty diverse cast. While a large number of units are of fairly similar quality, you also get some extremes like Percival and Nime, or on the other end of the spectrum, people like Wendy and Sophia. I've seen some people criticize this lack of balance as a flaw in Fire Emblem 6's design, but honestly, I think an unbalanced cast adds something to the game. You can get the power fantasy of using gods among men, or you can get the power fantasy of raising someone from zero to hero. And the team that you build feels like your own because of what makes these units distinct from one another. Anyway, one of the worst units in the Binding Blade is Sophia, an underleveled dark mage who is so bad that she frequently comes up in conversations about the worst unit in the franchise's history. Personally, my vote goes to FE12 Bantu, but I understand that Sophia's lack of accuracy and absolute dearth of positive qualities makes her a contender. Well, I say dearth of positive qualities because as a unit, the half-mana kit is understated, doesn't have the growths to make up for it, and doesn't even have a good class line, because as a dark mage, she will always have to use the worst of the three tome types. Dark, which is more powerful than light, but is also incredibly inaccurate. And, considering her skill stat, yeah, she's not beating those misallegations. I guess you could grind her support with Roy to get the Fire Dark full hit bonuses. Because, you know, it's not like there are a bunch of good units competing for the Roy support. But there is one possible point in Sophia's favor, and that is the fact that she's involved in a secret event on her join map that rewards the player with a guiding ring, the second one in the game. This item can allow you to promote Ellen, Lou, Clarine, Saul, Lelina, Ray, Sophia, or Hugh. And while Sophia and Hugh are pretty bad and Ray is kind of middling, the other four candidates all have a plethora of positive attributes that make them contenders for most team compositions. And even if, for some reason, you don't need another guiding rings sell for enough that with the silver card, you can buy 1.25 extra pairs of boots. So basically what I'm saying is the guiding ring is very valuable, and since Sophia gets it for you, it just barely pulls her out of last place on most tier lists. Or does it? You see, there is some disagreement as to whether or not Sophia should get credit for this guiding ring. There's been a weirdly high amount of debate on this topic in YouTube videos, Serenus Forest posts, and Discord servers, and I find it kind of fascinating. It's ultimately a mostly pointless question because whether or not Sophia gets credit isn't going to change how the average player uses her in their playthrough. And even if you're the sort of person who thinks that tier list rankings are the word of God, at most this moves Sophia like 2 places within F tier. Basically what I'm saying is, even by the standards of Fire Emblem discourse, this is one of the most pointless discussions that there will ever be. So of course I'm going to make an entire video on it. I find these sort of debates weirdly fascinating. In preparation for this video, I made a poll asking people whether they give Sophia credit for the guiding ring, as well as asking for the reasoning why or why not in the comments, and weirdly enough, over the past 2 years, I've actually had my opinion on this topic move back and forth a couple of times. So hopefully I can give a relatively unbiased look into the reasoning for both the for and against crowd. My goal with this video isn't to convince anyone of anything, by the way. I'm not going to try to change anyone's minds because God, this is the most low-stakes issue imaginable. Cards on the table before we start, I do currently give her credit for the guiding ring, and I factor that in on the tier list that I made for FE6 a couple of months ago. But if you don't think Sophia deserves credit for the guiding ring, like, whatever, I'm not going to try to argue with you. Like I said, this does not matter. It is the most low-stakes and probably the most pointless video I've ever made. Let's dive in! The argument that Sophia gets credit for the guiding ring is a pretty straightforward one. It is an action that she takes that benefits your army, and when units take actions that benefit your army, we give them credit. In this sense, Sophia acquiring the guiding ring is not all that different from any of your thieves acquiring items from treasure chests. The only distinction is you click the wait command instead of the pick command. Therefore, the argument goes, if we're giving credit to thieves for the items that they steal, we should be giving Sophia credit for the singular item that she acquires. It's not much, but it's the same thief utility that Volk has in Radiant Dawn, which lands him pretty low on the Radiant Dawn tier list, but that's a discussion for another time. There is, of course, some debate to be had as to whether or not thieves should be given credit for utility as well, and I've seen some people argue that comparing utility units such as staffers, dancers, and thieves to your combat units is inherently incompatible. Therefore, if we're making a tier list, we should have a utility tier where we shove all of the units who aren't doing any combat. I understand the logic behind this argument, but personally I disagree for a couple of reasons. The first is that, for me, some of the fun of making tier lists is the idea of comparing these units that fulfill completely different roles in your army. The question of whether Raisin or Titania does more for you in a Path of Radiance playthrough doesn't have a concrete answer, but instead is just a fun thought exercise. Even when comparing superficially similar units, it is very rare for one to be objectively better or worse than another. Marcus is much stronger in the beginning of the game, but Alan and Lance will be much stronger at the end of the game. And how you order the three of them really depends on which you value more. But the more poignant reason that I usually don't include a utility tier in my tier lists is there are many units who have a lot of utility, but are not purely utility units. In Thracia 776, Parn has quite good combat at join, but he also has incredibly good thief utility. He definitely ends up with a lower ranking if we ignore the theft that he can do, but I would also argue against categorizing him as purely a utility unit because he does far more than just thief utility. Inversely, Karen is not what we would typically think of as a utility unit, since she's a Pegasus rider, meaning that she's a class that can do combat, but her combat is abysmal. Therefore, the majority of her use cases are for rescue dropping or flying to rescue villages and stuff. The idea of not ranking utility units gets further complicated by incredibly strong units who do both combat and utility roles. Pent from Fire Emblem 7 and Jacob from Fire Emblem Fates both have very strong 1-2 range combat and the ability to use staves, and in Pent's case, he is a very good staffer. One of the reasons that Cavaliers are consistently ranked so highly is they role compress the utility of rescue dropping with their incredibly good combat. Inversely, units like Roy and Leaf tend to have subpar combat, but make up for it with the additional utility granted by their supports. Sure, ranking dancers or warpers can get a little bit complicated, but I would say that that is a far lesser complication than if we leave utility off the table entirely. But that's just me personally. If you want to make a utility tier and just put all of the pure utility units there in your tier lists, that's completely fine. I'm not trying to tell anyone what to do. Back on topic though, let's talk about Sophia and the Guiding Ring. The anti-Guiding Ring argument starts by building off of the assumption that we do not give units credit for the items in their starting inventory. Personally, this is an assumption that I usually agree with, but it is worth pointing out that it is an assumption. There's no grand council of Fire Emblem tier listing that gives the specific criteria everyone needs to use for all of their tier lists, and if you personally want to make a tier list where you give units credit for the items in their starting inventory, that's absolutely fine. Under most circumstances, I don't, and so this video will be continuing with the assumption that units don't get credit for the items in their starting inventory, but I just wanted to make it clear that I'm not trying to dictate how people make their own rankings. Now, the reason I say usually is because if a unit begins the map in an active combat situation where their starting inventory is going to matter beyond trading, then I do think that is a consideration in their ranking. In Fire Emblem 4 Chapter 3, there are several units that start far away from your starting squad in Bridget, Tilchu, and Claude, and the items that they have in their starting inventory affect how well they can contribute to keeping themselves alive in that situation. On the other hand, Boris starts with an Iron Lance and a Vulnerary, but he's surrounded by blue units, so he can just trade them to someone on turn 1, and in that situation, as with most situations, I don't think his starting inventory matters. The reason this is relevant to the Sophia conversation is, the argument goes, the guiding ring doesn't start in Sophia's inventory, but it might as well. It's acquired by Sophia in her join map, and she's force deployed on that map, so she's not fighting with anyone else over a deployment slot. While it does require her to move to a specific patch of sand in order to get it, this is a patch of sand that your army is naturally moving towards because that's where the throne is. You have to seize the throne in order to enter the map, and everyone's just sort of moving along over to that area. Sure, some of your stronger units like Milady and Shanna might go off on solo missions, but Sophia isn't exactly what I would call one of your stronger units. If she wants to stay alive, she needs to stay with the bulk of your army, and the bulk of your army is going to end up in the area where she picks up the guiding ring. Since Sophia surviving this map is mandatory for the Gaiden chapter, and the Gaiden chapter is mandatory for the good ending, many players see Sophia as a game over condition on this map. So if she has to move to that area to survive, and she has to survive for you to get the good ending, then what difference does it make if the guiding ring starts in her inventory or gets added to her inventory later? I've seen some people compare the whole Sophia guiding ring situation to the many side quests in the series where you must protect a green unit to get a reward, such as the spider attacking villagers in Chapter 6 of Sacred Stones, or Klein and Tate's units that turn green upon recruitment that will give you an Orion's Bolt and an Elysian Whip respectively. Yes, in this instance, Sophia is a blue unit, but so the argument goes, the only difference that makes is it's easier to protect her, and I mean, can you imagine escorting green Sophia through the desert? So yeah, that is the basic argument against giving Sophia credit for the guiding ring. She's force deployed, she's a game over condition, and acquiring the item is barely removed from a passive action. All she has to do is move and wait. And it seems like a large number of people agree with this logic. I ran a community poll a couple of weeks ago, and 41% of respondents said that they did not believe Sophia deserves any credit at all for the guiding ring. 48% of respondents do think that she deserves some amount of credit, but of those 48%, 28% thought that she deserved only partial credit for the guiding ring. Presumably for the same reason that she is force deployed and a game over condition. I'll be honest, I was a little bit surprised at just how many people voted she deserves no credit, or even that she only deserves partial credit due to her force deployed status. So I decided to ask about a couple of similar situations and see how people felt about those. The first poll was about Leaf from Fire Emblem 5 and his Leadership Star utility, not to be confused with his support utility. Leaf's supports only affect specific units, and he has to be within 3 tiles of them. Meanwhile, in Thracia, units with leadership stars give the rest of your army +3 to their hit and avoid as long as they are deployed and unrescued. This is a global effect, so positioning doesn't matter. The argument against giving Leaf credit for his leadership stars, therefore, is he's force deployed and a game over condition. Therefore, this is just a feature that you can't really avoid. You could rescue him, but as long as he's not being rescued, everyone's getting that hit and avoid bonus. I was surprised to find that a much larger population of people gave Leaf full credit for his leadership stars than Sophia full credit for her guiding ring. Personally, I give both of them full credit for both of these traits, but I think that if you were to argue one of them deserves it less, it's probably Leaf. At least Sophia has to specifically move to a certain tile in the desert. Sure, it's one that she's probably moving to anyway, but Leaf doesn't even have to take that extra step. I thought this might have something to do with the guiding ring being an item. People get a little bit weird about items in tier lists, to the point that I've seen people genuinely argue that units with personal weapons shouldn't get credit for their personal weapons because it is an item, even though it's an item that only they can use. So I decided to ask about thieves getting credit for items on maps where they're force deployed, specifically Chad from Fire Emblem 6, since it's the same game as Sophia. And I was once again surprised to find that many more people felt he deserves full credit than Sophia. I even got a couple of comments asking why I would ask such a silly question, and I agree, it is a silly question. I don't really think there's any argument that Chad shouldn't get credit for the halberd and gold on the map where he joins, but apparently 13% of people disagree with me. Which, just to be clear, is fine. If that's the way you want to rate units, more power to you. I think any criteria can be valid so long as that criteria is applied consistently. Which leads me to my confusion over the Sophia guiding ring debacle. Why do so many fewer people give Sophia credit for the item she acquires on her join map than Chad the credit for the item that he does? Or, for that matter, why do so many fewer people give Sophia credit for the guiding ring than Leaf credit for the leadership stars? As time went on, I asked about Marth going to villages for items and gold, and Carrion getting the Paragon Sword from a talk conversation after his join map. And yet, in both of these cases, the majority of people seem to agree that these units should get credit for the items and gold they acquire by doing these tasks. And that's the main reason I wanted to make this video. I'm just confused as to what makes Sophia's guiding ring so different from all of these other examples. I don't think that there's any sort of objectively right or wrong criteria for making a tier list or ranking units, but I do think if you are going to try to rank and evaluate units, you should have a concrete and consistent criteria while doing so. If you're one of the people who thinks Sophia shouldn't get credit for the guiding ring, but does think that all of these other units should get credit for their items, I'm genuinely curious why it is that you feel that way, and I would love to hear from you in the comments below. Ultimately, I probably won't agree with you, but it would be nice to understand the logic. And to be clear, it doesn't mean that you're wrong. I don't think there is a right or wrong answer to whether Sophia gets credit for the guiding ring. Which I guess you could say makes this video pretty pointless. Although, personally, I would argue that the video's thesis statement is more about consistency in our criteria than it is specifically about Sophia herself. Regardless though, it is kind of awesome that I get to spend all this time making theoretically pointless videos. And for that I have my patrons to thank. So, thank you to Michael Kraus, Len, Gameboo, Karosa, Fyrant, Smaz Ruby, Saxon, Reflect, Mara McLean, Calamity Callie, Queen Eliza, Adele, They Thom, Andu, Axel Rosenberg, A Bard with Capped Movement, Jamie Collins, Mean Jojo, Thick Molder, Arvis, Bell Wenska, Dysyke, Ginger, Tailored Muffin, George Granville the 7th PM, SUP, Caius Cole, Gabe the Green, Control Daegis, Joanna the Wrenchwitch, and especially my Jakins, Autumn Telsey, Joss Jingle, and Julia Kyoto. Also, double especially, thank you to Roman Kormansik. Roman has actually been a pre-promote for over a month, but I forgot to update my Patreon graphic, and the graphic is where I read the names from every week, so I hadn't been thanking Roman. So thank you, Roman. I'm sorry for that. I'll try to make sure it doesn't happen in the future. If you are interested in supporting the channel and hopefully actually getting your name in the credits, there is a link to my Patreon below. But please, please, please only donate if you can comfortably afford to do so. I don't want anyone going broke over Fire Emblem. Free ways to support the channel include liking, sharing, and commenting below. Speaking of which, this week's comment code word is Dragonstone. So if you made it to the end of the video, make sure you include Dragonstone in your comment. That way I know you watched all the way through. Lastly, if you're interested in hearing more about Sophia than just the guiding ring, fellow YouTuber and friend of the channel Eat Your Greens has a couple of videos dedicated to her, so go ahead and check them out. They will be linked in the description below. But regardless of what you choose to do, I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for watching. Stay safe, gamers.